This is the Milo Yiannopoulos Show, and I am here, I'm very excited, I am here with style icon, sartorial genius, political consultant, lobbyist, strategist, Trump friend and fan, Roger Stone. Thank you for joining me, Roger. Delighted to be here. I feel like, you're banned at Twitter, I'm banned at CNN. I feel like I'm with a kindred soul. It's funny. Something's happening in culture at the moment where the right has become punk and the right has become the mischievous dissident set. And people were expecting me to be very upset about the Twitter ban. And immediately my mind went to MTV in the 90s when I grew up, and all of the coolest people and the best music videos were being banned from MTV. And it wasn't in the least bit an indication of failure. It was actually an incredible badge of cool.
Yeah, it's just evolution. Video killed the radio star. The left, when they can't refute your arguments with facts, when they're incapable of arguing on factual basis, they resort to name calling and then censorship. See, liberals love free speech as long as it's theirs.
As long as it's people advocating for socialism and communism and Black Lives Matter and crazy man-hating feminism. But if you decide to stick up for capitalism or anybody or anything else, then suddenly free speech is a problem and criticism and ridicule becomes abuse and harassment, right?
Well, I know for a fact that there's an organization called Media Matters for America. It's a Hillary Clinton front. It's financed by George Soros. It is run by this truly odious character, David Brock. And they've gone to the Federal Election Commission in the United States and also to the Federal Communications Commission to file complaints against Matt Drudge because they don't like what he writes. They want to close him down, somehow arguing that by expressing his First Amendment rights, that is an unreported political contribution. It's absurd. We might as well put duct tape across our mouths.
Isn't that amazing?
They can't face the truth.
What is it they're so afraid of us saying?
Well, we're politically correct because we challenge the idea, for example, that Hillary is a feminist. 50 years of her attacking and intimidating and bullying her husband's sexual assault victims. Oops, I just said it.
It's okay. You can go there on this show.
Yeah, the former president is a serial rapist. The difference between Bill Cosby and Bill Clinton is Cosby drugs his women, victims, where Bill likes to physically overpower and bite his. I'm not making this up. There are 27 women who have come forward, and there will be more shortly who have contacted me who are ready to come forward, who say that Bill not only savagely assaulted them, bit their upper lips, in some cases raped them, in some cases they were able to escape, but he would then stalk them afterwards. And of course, what Hillary did was even worse because she would target these women. She would hire private detectives to dig up dirt on them. She would have them harassed on a daily basis, meaning they were followed. Their next door neighbors would be apprised that they might commit suicide at any time. Their pets were killed. Their children were threatened. Their cars were vandalized. That's Hillary Clinton, the feminist. She's not an advocate for women. She's an abuser of women.
Now, some of the charges you lay in front of her are quite extraordinary, but I've read, very compelling reports of a lot of this stuff. And you said what she has done, what people allege that she has done, is even worse than what Bill did. It sort of is in a way, and particularly when she's running for president, because it's not so much the bad behavior, it's lying about it afterwards and the hypocrisy that I think for most people is going to simply make her ineligible for president. She doesn't have, in my view, the sort of moral character necessary to be president. There's a great question about presidentiality. Is Donald Trump presidential material? And it seems to boil down to people who simply don't like his personality very much. But Hillary Clinton, some of the behavior that younger voters won't know about and won't remember from Bill's time in office steps beyond churlishness or rudeness or the bluster that people sometimes don't like about Donald and into quite dark, quite scary stuff, doesn't it?
Well, here's the thing. I have known Donald Trump for 39 years. I met him in New York when I came here to organize Governor Ronald Reagan's campaign for president. And we hit it off immediately. I spent a great deal of time with him, not only then, but over the years. I have worked for him on and off in that interim. I was the chairman of his Presidential Exploratory Committee when he looked at the presidency in 2000. I came back as a consultant to him 4 years ago when I wanted him to challenge the hopeless and pathetic Mitt Romney. And with Trump, you see, the Trump you see on television, that's the only Trump there is. He doesn't have two personalities. He has one personality.
Yeah.
Hillary has two personalities. Publicly, she attempts to be the warm, likable grandmother. Privately, she's a foul-mouthed, short-tempered, nasty, vicious, extraordinarily abusive maniac. She's, I think, bipolar at least. I have a new booklet out called The Quotable Clintons, which I'll be bringing to the public here shortly. It's just a little booklet, but it's her various quotes over the years, and you see her abusing police officers, abusing her security detail, just abusing people endlessly.
This stuff is going to come as a surprise to lots of people. This stuff is going to be very remarkable to them because very often we don't get a glimpse behind the scenes of what politicians are really like. We get some sort of ready access, if you like, into Donald Trump's brain because of his Twitter account. But with Hillary Clinton, it almost seems like there's no there. It's very difficult to put your finger on a real human being behind her. And I think that's what a lot of people find unsettling. I want to talk to you about another president that you know of well, that you are a fan of. And that's Nixon. And you are a fan of Nixon so much so that you even have a tattoo of him on your back, which I think most people know now. Now, many of the listeners of this show are younger. And what I found remarkable about the American education system is just how badly it prepares them to operate in a world of politics and in the public square. A lot of younger people are very poorly educated about who Reagan and Nixon were. Of course, they know all sorts of things about left-wing figures from history. But tell us a little bit about your experience of Nixon and why you have a tattoo of him on your back. And then perhaps just sort of talk to us about whether you think, I'm interested in this, whether you think Nixon's offense, deleting or destroying 18 and a half minutes of tape, is comparable in any way to Hillary deleting 33,000 emails. But talk to us a little bit about Nixon first.
Sure. I met Nixon, who was president from 1969 till 1974, when I was 16 years old, and I had decided on the basis of a great deal of study that he had been cheated out of the presidency in the 1960 election. Of course, I wasn't old enough to vote. This is research I actually began when I was 12. Because I was
12 years old?
Yeah, I became a big fan of Barry Goldwater, largely because I was living in a relatively affluent area outside of New York City. And the woman who lived next door to us was a very active Republican, we used to call Little Old Lady in tennis sneakers, and she was a Goldwater supporter. So she gave me a copy of Goldwater's book, Conscience of a Conservative, and I was transformed. I knew immediately that not only was I conservative, but that politics was the calling that I wanted to aspire to. Up till that time, I wanted to be an actor. Only later would I learn that politics is show business for ugly people.
Which, of course, excludes you from the possibility of participating.
Well, but of course, the two worlds are very, very similar. In any event, I was a Goldwater zealot. I convinced my parents to let me go to the Republican National Convention in San Francisco, which meant driving all the way across the country. It was a great experience. And then, of course, I worked my heart out for Goldwater, but being 12 years old, I never realized he was going to not only lose, but lose badly. So after he lost, I began my research, and I came to the sad conclusion that Barry Goldwater had done a lot of it to himself. He was a hip shooter, and he was a cowboy, and he wasn't very pragmatic. So that's when I decided that to study Nixon. And I wrote Nixon a letter. He was out of office. He was in, Churchill-like exile at that point, practicing law in New York City. And I told him earnestly that I had concluded that he had been screwed in the election, that the Kennedys had cheated. That John F. Kennedy, although he might have been quite handsome, had an IQ of about 70. And his gangster father, who made his money in the bootlegging business of illegal alcohol, and whose father was affiliated with the mob in both Chicago and New York,
yes, that's true,
had purchased the presidency for his son like you would purchase a bauble at a jewelry store. And that he, Nixon, should not stand for this, that he should run again. Anyway, he invited me to come into New York City for a chat. I think they were kind of surprised when I showed up and I was only 16. I think they were expecting an adult. But he told me completely insincerely that he was finished with politics and that he would never try again. But when I do, I'll be in touch. So 2 years later, I went to work for him, and he is perhaps our greatest president. People will find that shocking because all they know is Watergate. But to do a quick review, he ended the Vietnam War, which was a quagmire, much faster and on a faster time basis than the Pentagon wanted. He opened the door to relations with China by circumventing his own leaking foreign policy apparatus. He negotiated a SALT agreement, a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Russians. He desegregated the public schools. When he became president, 86% of the schools in America, public schools, were still segregated. That number was like 9 by the time he left. No bloodshed, no riots, nobody killed. He started the Environmental Protection Agency. He made a unilateral decision in 1973 to intervene in the Yom Kippur War, in which he and he alone saved Israel. Without Richard Nixon, there would be no Israel today. The Egyptians and the Syrians had the Israelis with their back to the sea. They were running out of bullets. Kissinger, of course, says to Nixon, you can't get involved. The Joint Chief of Staffs say to Nixon, we shouldn't get involved. Nixon overruled all of them, and he airlifted $30 million worth of lethal aid to the Israelis, saving the state of Israel. Every time one of my liberal Jewish friends starts bitching about Nixon, I have to remind them about this.
That's funny.
We had federal revenue sharing, which meant that your tax dollars weren't spent in Washington, but were filtered down to local government. Let them decide how to spend it. But he was a very tortured soul. He never really got over the fact that the 1960 election was stolen from him. He had gone from the U.S. House of Representatives to the vice presidency of the United States in only 6 years. He was a Navy lieutenant watching Eisenhower drive by in a parade when he was discharged from the military after the war to being vice president of the United States in a span of 6 years. That's a meteoric rise for a young man. And he was on his way to the presidency until he ran into these thugs, the Kennedys. And he had no idea. I mean, he was not a soft guy, don't get me wrong. He was a hardball player, but nothing compared to the dirty tricks that were perpetrated on him by the Kennedys. In my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, and also in my book, Nixon's Secrets, both of which I recommend to you.
As do I.
I very carefully and at great length detail the voter fraud in Texas and Illinois that stole the presidency from Nixon. Anyway, let me come to the point. What I liked most about him was not ideological, because although I think he leaned right, he was not the conservative that you and I are. He was a pragmatic conservative. What I liked about him is it didn't seem to matter how many times he got knocked down, he kept getting up. He ran for president in 1960. It's stolen from him. He loses by a handful of votes. He then returns to his native California, where he's the odds-on favorite to be governor. He runs and he loses. Then in 1964, he is passed over for the nomination for president. In 1968, because of his own perseverance, because of his own resilience, because of years of hard work and focus, he rises from the ashes like a Lazarus to become one of our greatest presidents. So, as he used to say, it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get up. The Nixon story is a story of resilience. It's a story of perseverance. This is why I have his tattoo on my back about the size of a grapefruit.
Is it that big? I didn't realize it was that big.
Yeah, I'm the only guy you know with a dick on the front and the back.
Something tells me you've used that line before.
And if I may crib from you, and they're both big. Thank you. Couldn't resist, sorry.
No, you don't have to apologize. This is exactly the right show to do it on. You mentioned voter fraud. Now, in the places in which Bernie lost to Hillary in the primaries,
yes,
lost by big margins,
yes,
these are exclusively the places that have the electronic voting, no paper trails, right?
Yes.
Are you worried about voter fraud in the upcoming election? If you are, what's the solution? What can Trump do to, because it seems to me there's only one option really, which is like win by a big margin so that whatever they do, he's still over the line. But what can be done about this? And then why aren't the Republicans doing it? If the Democrats can do it, why aren't Republicans? Are Republicans just stupider?
Well, let's take it one by one. First of all, I was on a Huffington Post broadcast the other day, in which when this question was raised, the woman moderator, commentator, who I will spare by not mentioning her name, looked at me and said, there is no voter fraud. It doesn't exist. It's all been disproven.
They think it's a myth, don't they?
I just had to say to her, may I ask, what kind of drugs are you on? She's clearly on drugs. So let's try to look at this objectively. I think your audience knows, I think we all know, that in this day and age, a computer can do anything. These voter machines are essentially a computer. Who is to say they could not be rigged? Of course they can. Now, you ask me why the Republicans don't do it. Quite sadly, I think they do. That's why I briefly had to leave the Republican Party and become a libertarian. I have no doubt that after the last election, when Karl Rove, who was George Bush's campaign manager and a Romney partisan, insisted that, no, your numbers have to be wrong, he said on Fox. Romney will definitely carry Ohio. The reason he was so certain is because it was bought and paid for. He knew the fix was supposed to be in. Therefore, I can only conclude that sometimes things don't stay bought. And perhaps Obama came in with a better offer. But yes, we do have widespread
This stuff
voting.
is going to horrify most voters. I mean, this is amazing.
Well, I think that there's a mathematician named Richard Charnin. He's a very eccentric fellow. Last time I met him, he was wearing a ski jacket in 90-degree weather. He's one of those. He's also brilliant. He's a retired mathematician, and he's a genius. He's written an extensive monograph on how every election in the state of Wisconsin in the last decade has been stolen. And you figure this out by comparing the polling on a district-by-district basis to the results, and then you'll find a swing that is just mathematically impossible. In other words, if you were losing a given precinct by 4 points, and then you win it by 12, such a swing is unlikely, to say the least. So,
what does this swing, do they typically move in one direction?
Oh, yeah, the elections are rigged for one entity or the other. So
right.
Who are the perpetrators? Well, the perpetrators are the people who manufacture and sell these machines. The most common electronic voting machine, which is really just a computer, is a company called Diebold. Diebold's top executives and the owners of the company are major donors to the Bushes. Is this a major factor on how George W. Bush quite improbably beat John Kerry? An election that, in all truth, on paper, Kerry should have won and Bush should have lost. So, to bring it to the current time, I think we have widespread voter fraud. The first thing that Trump needs to do is begin talking about it constantly. It's inoculation, if you will. He needs to say, for example, today would be a perfect example, I am leading in Florida. The polls all show it. If I lose Florida, we will know that there's voter fraud.
Yes.
If there's voter fraud, this election will be illegitimate. The election of the winner will be illegitimate. We will have a constitutional crisis. We will have widespread civil disobedience, and the government will no longer be the government. If we can't have an honest election, nothing else counts. I think he's got to put them on notice that their inauguration will be a rhetorical, and what I mean civil disobedience, not violence, but it will be a bloodbath. The government will be literally shut down if they attempt to steal this and swear Hillary in. No, we will not stand for it. We will not stand for it.
So, I mean, the dream here, the ultimate, I mean, the ideal is that he wins by such a significant margin nationally that this is unnecessary. But it's interesting to hear you say this. And it's funny also because Trump will go there. He will go to the places other politicians won't. And he's probably the only person to run for president in the last 50 years who would dare to do this and might even get away with it. It's remarkable, isn't it? How he's just sort of re-injected reality into politics. In a way, you know, it's a remarkable effect he's having. We had supper a few nights ago and we were talking a little about Trump. And I said, you know, it's the political correctness that I really like about him. The existential threat he represents to this trend in America of not being able to tell the truth. And this is, I suppose, one of those arenas in which his natural addiction to plain speaking might be quite transformative for future elections. We're going to go to break. When we get back, I want to talk to Roger Stone about a bit more about Trump, a little about Brexit, and of course, the most important subject, the subject that I have been dying to discuss on the air with him, which is his wonderful and incomparable personal style. We'll be back. Our friends at TrueCar have been selling so many cars thanks to the Milo show that I think they may be close to opening TrueJet, finally allowing me to purchase a sponsor's product. But until then, my beloved audience can continue to utilize TrueCar. You may not know that using TrueCar can also help you buy a used car. In fact, there are over 500,000 pre-owned vehicles available from TrueCar certified dealers nationwide. Whether you're looking to buy new or used, you can get upfront pricing information that empowers consumers, discounts off the list price for used cars, and a better buying experience through our TrueCar certified dealer network. You'll see what other people paid for the car you want, so you'll know what a fair price is and feel confident about your buying decision. With TrueCar, you can connect with a local certified dealer of your choosing so you can enjoy a quick, easy buying experience. And using the TrueCar website or the TrueCar app, you can easily find the new or used car you want. When you're ready to buy a new or a used car, visit TrueCar.com or download the TrueCar app to enjoy a better car buying experience. Some features are not available in all states. It's the podcast with political analysis as rigorous as my daily hair care routine. Welcome back to the Milo Yiannopoulos Show on Podcast One. We're back. I'm with Roger Stone. How are you doing, darling?
Excellent.
Wonderful. Let me go to my favorite subject first. We went for dinner the other night and you were wearing a beautiful suit, as you always are. Talk us through this, because you just, there's something about the way that you were turned out that tells me that perhaps, just maybe, you are not buying your suits off the rack from the local mall. Talk us through your sort of style evolution, because you've become somebody that everybody's always anxious to see because they want to know what you're wearing and how you're going to look. It's one of those expectations that you have created in people's minds that is unusual for somebody who works in politics. Talk us through what the reasoning is behind you spending so much time on how you look and where the clothes come from. Talk us through some of your sort of style inspirations.
Well, of course, the whole concept of being well-dressed is to approach the whole thing with a certain nonchalance. The key is to look like you've given it no thought whatsoever, that you have just kind of thrown it all together.
That's the what, this old thing? That's that yes. Kind of what the ladies sometimes say.
Yes. Well, this begins really when I was younger. I had 40-inch shoulders but a 30-inch waist. And I was a runner, and then I became a weightlifter. And the problem with that is you can no longer buy anything off the rack because the trousers are much too large. The jacket can always be altered, but the trousers are much too large. Therefore, when you alter them, the pockets in the back are next to each other, and of course that won't work. So I began having to have articles of clothing made. Well, that in turn gives you the opportunity to pick the fabrics, peak lapels over notched lapels, decide whether you want it to be double-breasted or single-breasted, recreate classics that you could no longer find, in a store if you wanted to. So, for example, whenever Edward, the Duke of Windsor, Edward VIII, the former King of England, would come to the United States, he would wear something, for example, a Glen plaid suit, gray Glen plaid suit, which is called the Prince of Wales plaid. And that would immediately become the phenomena, meaning the manufacturers would immediately go out and knock it off and sell it. when he came here and was seen wearing brown suede shoes with a gray suit, overnight, brown suede shoes and a gray suit became acceptable. Not only acceptable, but fashionable. So I have had this luxury. Now, the nice thing is that I haven't bought a new suit or sports jacket or trousers in probably 20 years. My favorite tailor is Anderson and Shepherd in London.
Beautiful.
Which is a style of clothing that has a very soft shoulder, has a very full chest and back, is very comfortable because it moves with you. There's no padding. There's nothing built up. This is the style of Fred Astaire, Cary Grant, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., some of the great dressers, of course, Edward VIII that we spoke about, some of the great dressers of all time. It's kind of the cross-section of Hollywood and Westminster.
You know, I wondered if you were an Anderson and Shepherd guy. Because
it's entirely timeless.
Yeah, no, my journalistic mentor was an Anderson and Shepherd guy, and his suits looked a little like yours. I wondered if you were too. So talk us through some of your style icons. So who really inspires you? Because some of us, you know, who have quite distinctive individual personal styles introduce sort of 50 to 60% of our own originality with a couple of nods, little homages to the past. Who would you say are the best dressed men in history that you like to look up to?
Well, of course, most of these names will mean nothing to some of your audience, but I would urge them to go to Google Images and check some of these fellows.
You see, this show is 50% entertainment and 50% education, and so I encourage everyone to listen to it with Google in front of them. Go ahead.
Yeah, so for example, Gary Cooper, American actor, style icon, probably the most famous actor of the 1930s and 40s, epically handsome. He had his clothes made in both Italy and the UK. He was a Brioni man, famous Italian tailor. He also
very wide lapels, isn't it? He had huge lapels.
And he had because he had huge shoulders. And he would certainly be one I would mention. Gianni Agnelli, the Italian playboy, the automobile magnate, who was the chairman of Fiat and who was fucking Jacqueline Kennedy, among others. It is widely thought that John F. Kennedy Jr. was actually Agnelli's son. High probability of that if you take a look at photos of both of them. He was a singular dresser. He had a habit of he would wear these Brooks Brothers button-down roll shirts, and he would wear his wristwatch over the cuff, which became like a personal statement. He was one of the great dressers. Of course, the Prince of Wales, we discussed him. He was excellent at mixing plaids and stripes and solids in a way that is truly dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. You run the risk of looking like a clown.
It's one of those things you have to know the rules incredibly well to be able to break them effectively, right?
Yes, I think it's actually Alan Flusser, who is my tailor in New York, and perhaps the foremost arbiter of men's style in the world. He says, first you must know the rules before you have license to break them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. So what are the rules? One would never wear a button-down shirt with a double-breasted suit. The shirt is too casual and the suit is too formal, for example. Small things like that. A white shirt after 6 o'clock. A colored shirt or a striped shirt before 6 o'clock. Now, I may be the only person alive who still adheres to some of these rules.
But this is, of course, why you've reached sort of iconic status in anyone who cares about fashion.
Plus, if you have a tan, you must wear a white shirt on that day because the contrast between the two of them makes you look like $1 million. Or as I say in Stone's rules, look good, feel good.
Yes, I've realized as I've started to pick up a little color in my cheeks, all completely natural and simply as a result of hanging out outside, of course. Yes. I've started to notice how much better I look in white shirts, and it's beautiful because there's something about very crisp white, clean, almost a blue white, like it's so new and so white. You know, nice little Brooks Brothers with the lovely S collar. It brings out all the caramel and butter in your skin tones, you know, and you start to look almost delicious. You almost look like a delicious foodstuff. All right, well, that's been an exciting little diversion. I want to ask you a couple of political questions again before we wrap up. And first of all, it's very exciting to me watching the revolt against globalization, the revolt against globalism. And it's been very heartening to me to see the people of the UK reject the EU, reject the European Union, reject the sort of overweening, nannying bureaucracy, and reclaim sovereignty in a way that I think Donald Trump's voters have been motivated to do in the US. Do you have a view on the future of the UK outside of Europe? Do you think Brexit was a good thing?
I think it was the tell, as we say in the United States. Globalism is being rejected everywhere. We have two choices. It's the same choice that the UK just had. You had to choose globalism over British sovereignty. The British people, every trick in the book was tried. As you know, the polls all showed that it would lose. The mainstream media acted like those who were supporting it were kooks, nutcases. Yet they won because people want to be in control of their own destiny. Now we face the exact same choice here. Hillary is the globalist candidate. She would surrender American sovereignty to this international model. By the way, she's not the only one. Every other candidate for president in the Republican Party was, in fact, a globalist. Ted Cruz talks a good game. His wife wrote a famous paper talking about joining the Canadian, U.S., and Mexican government into one unit. Mm-hmm. She's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is an elitist, globalist organization of people who despise the idea of American singularity or American exceptionalism. This is the choice the British people faced. This is the choice we face. I had a great secret meeting with Nigel Farage at the Cleveland Convention, which is now
not secret any longer.
Because we probably just announced it to about 500,000. But first of all, he's a fine gentleman. He drank me under the table. But he had some very acute thoughts on how they had gone about winning blue-collar voters, working-class voters, which are entirely applicable to the situation here in the United States. It's a breathtaking moment. Globalism is being rejected around the globe, and it will be rejected here next.
And you're quite confident about Trump winning, aren't you?
Well, I am not overly confident. I think that it is notable that Hillary is pursuing the same strategy as Barack Obama, both 4 and 8 years ago, which is quite different than the strategy pursued by her husband in the 90s. In the 90s, when we had a Republican trend in the country and the vast majority of white voters, despite the fact that many of them were Democrats, were beginning to vote Republican, Bill Clinton moved his party, at least rhetorically, to the center to be a more moderate party, and then regained the votes of moderate whites in the South and the West to defeat George Bush. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are pursuing a very different strategy. They are seeking the votes of no moderates. They believe if they get every left-of-center voter, minorities, gays and lesbians, they think, unions, labor voters, blue-collar voters, their old coalition, as it were, and Trump goes out and gets the votes of everybody who is right of center, their stack will be larger than ours. You know, the sad thing is they're right. But what they don't count on is Trump's ability to make inroads among gay voters, among black voters, among a number of among Jewish voters. Now, he doesn't need to win those groups outright. He just has to do marginally better than the hapless, pathetic stiff from the country club, Mitt Romney. And he can do that. He's already doing it. And it will only keep getting better as voters learn more and more about Hillary Clinton. This is a woman who actually went to a Halloween party in blackface.
Did she know? I didn't know that.
And the photographs exist.
I didn't know that.
I predict to you that every person in America will see these photographs before this election is over.
That's now, very embarrassing for her now that she's on this platform.
Sure, if a Republican did that, he or she would be hounded out of the race.
Yes.
The reason so many young African American men are incarcerated in this country for nonviolent crimes that include the possession of small amounts of drugs is because Bill Clinton signed a law just before his reelection campaign for these mandatory sentences. You know, David Duke can only dream about holding back Black Americans as much as the Clintons have. They are responsible for the mass incarceration in this country. By the way, Hillary supported that agreement, that proposal. So,
I can't think of anything that would have done more damage to Black America than incarcerating all the men for having a blunt on them. It's difficult to think of anything that would hurt, that might have contributed to the parlous current state of Black America than that law. Am I right about that?
No, I think you're absolutely right, because it's taking fathers away from their children. It's taking men away from their women. It's destroying what is left of the Black family. Look, the only place Hillary Clinton wants to feed poor Black people is in a prison cafeteria. Bill and Hillary Clinton have been about as helpful to Black families as the Ku Klux Klan. Bill Clinton went to federal court as governor to try to defend racial profiling on behalf of the Arkansas State Police. That means a police officer can pull you over and question you simply for being Black.
Yeah.
And then there's the tragic story of Ricky Ray Rector. He was a severely retarded Black man convicted of murder, and Bill executed him on the eve of the 1988 Democratic primary in New Hampshire so that he could look tough on crime. The Pope appealed to Clinton for mercy. This guy was so badly retarded, when he was asked about his last meal, he said he wanted a turkey dinner and vanilla ice cream. And then he told his jailers that he would return for the ice cream after his execution. This man should have been spared. This man should have been spared, but it was too important for Bill to look tough on crime. So the Clintons are racists. Bill Clinton famously said to Ted Kennedy 8 years ago, and I quote from my own book, The Clintons' War on Women. Bill Clinton said, "Ted, a few years ago, this boy Obama would be bringing us coffee."
Wow.
So let's not get the idea that there's anything pro-Black by the Clintons. They are dog whistle racists, and they've never done anything for Black people, whereas Donald Trump has created thousands of jobs for Black people and gay people and Hispanic people and Asian people and white people and all people.
Well, this is his great thing, you know, this is him, Donald Trump, amazingly for such an apparently divisive character, has been sort of a unifier. If you listen to the way that he speaks, he spoke at the convention, you know, saying that this was about America and American values. I mean, Peter Thiel had a gay guy up on stage who said, I'm proud to be gay, proud to be Republican, but most of all, I'm proud to be an American. And that's the sort of oddly unifying message behind an on the surface divisive character. I find it encouraging that the left has decided to sink into grievance and victimhood and identity politics and just gone for these victim groups, hoping that they all add up to a majority. Because, of course, one thing they forget is how weak their stranglehold now is on groups like gays. I mean, 50% of homosexuals in the last election in the UK said they were going to vote Conservative. I don't think any such poll has even been conducted in the US, but if it were to be, the Democrats might find themselves quite worried.
Well, it's still early, but the truth, which I think is evident, is that only Donald Trump will protect gay people from the terror of Islamic maniacs.
Yeah, well, I said as much in Orlando immediately afterwards. I think you're right about that. It's all very well pandering and mollycoddling and sucking up to gay people and changing your avatar to a rainbow. But there's only one person running for president who actually... Well,
also, things, as you know, have changed. In other words, in the last election, we still had the question of marriage equality unresolved. Marriage equality is now, it's here and it's here to stay. So most of my friends who are gay have now moved on to two other issues that concern them more, or I should say concern them now. One is being protected from mass murderers, like we saw in Orlando,
Yeah.
And the other one is economic opportunity. I don't know anybody who's gay who doesn't want to be prosperous.
Of
who
course.
doesn't succeed.
And this is natural, this is logical. Once you've got the right to be with who you want, your focus then shifts to building the life with that person that you want, which of course then makes you more interested in economics than you were previously when you were fighting for civil rights. That makes complete sense to me. Roger, this has been the most fascinating conversation. I hope you'll come on again. And I will, I'm sure, see you around the maelstrom of Republican politics. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry that we didn't have more time this week, but this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for coming on. And I know that a lot of people at home are going to be absolutely fascinated by this discussion. And a lot of the younger people will have learned a lot of things they didn't know about Nixon, about style, and about all sorts of other things. So thank you so much, Roger.
I'm delighted to be here. You can go to stonezone.com.
That was going to be my next question, but you go ahead and tell people where they can find you.
And now this is kind of exciting. We have just launched stonecoldtruth.com, which I recommend that you check out. And if you're just looking for fashion tips, go to stoneonstyle.com.
Splendid.
I try to write
network of websites.
Well, when I try to write about style, it's nonpartisan. In other words, Democrats can get style tips as well. So I recommend all of those to you. I am delighted to be with you, and I salute you on what you have been doing to break the mold and show people that that there's a revolution coming. It's not just a domestic revolution in this country; it's an international revolution. And you are at the forefront of it.
Well, I think we both are, and we're both experiencing a lot of attention and excitement at the moment, in part driven by Donald Trump, but I think also in part simply driven by the frustration that many people feel about having this sort of degree of control exerted over them by cultural scolds and by some of the pressures against globalization or a variety of other things. So we both have lots on our plates and lots of exciting things going on. Check out Roger Stone. You're also, are you Roger J. Stone Jr. on Twitter? Am I remembering that right?
I am Roger J. Stone Jr. on Twitter.
Perfect.
At least until they ban me.
Well, since my suspension, now the most interesting blonde on Twitter, Roger J. Stone Jr. Thank you so much for joining us.
Many thanks. And as I said earlier, blondes really do have more fun.